In tonight's episode, we explore 4 chilling true encounters. In the Drumheller Badlands, a woman watched an unbelievable object appear out of nowhere. A police patrol car is violently struck by something invisible. A man who was suddenly and viciously attacked by objects from a strange craft, and children who encountered the same bizarre and unexplainable figure. Welcome to Strange Encounters. On a warm summer evening in early June of 1971, the Badlands of southern Alberta were quiet. The eroded hills and deep coulees around Drumheller and the small community of Rosedale lay under a clear night sky, far from city lights, the kind of place where darkness settles in fully and silence feels complete. On the outskirts of Rosedale stood a modest house shared by Esther Clappison and her brother Bill. They had lived there for years, accustomed to isolation and the strange beauty of the landscape around them. At approximately 8:50 p.m. on the night of June 7th, Esther noticed something unusual outside the house. A bright light appeared suddenly in the field not far from her window. It had not approached from the sky, nor did it move across the horizon. One moment it was not there, and the next it was, as if it had simply arrived. Curious and unsettled, she went to the window to get a better look. What she saw was not a conventional aircraft or vehicle. Sitting on the ground, roughly 200 feet from the house, was a dark, box-shaped object. It appeared solid and angular, unlike anything she recognized. One side of the object was illuminated by a bright white rectangular opening, like a window or hatch glowing from within. As her eyes adjusted, Esther realized she was not looking at an empty craft. Inside the illuminated opening, she could see movement. There were 3 small figures associated with the object. They were short, estimated at under 5 feet tall, and wore tight-fitting olive green suits that appeared to cover their entire bodies, including their heads. The material looked uniform and seamless. Where faces should have been, Esther could make out only dark, keyhole-shaped openings where the eyes would be. One of the figures was inside the craft, partially visible through the bright opening. This figure appeared to notice that it was being observed and made a deliberate motion, as if covering or concealing something inside, possibly a control panel or equipment. Another figure leaned partway out of the opening, while a third stood outside the craft, bent toward the ground. This figure appeared to be handling or examining something on the surface, possibly collecting rock samples from the Badlands soil. For several moments, Esther stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. The figures did not acknowledge her directly, but their movements were purposeful and calm. There was no sound of engines, no hum, no mechanical noise of any kind. The craft simply sat there, glowing softly against the dark terrain. Summoning her courage, Esther decided to step outside for a closer look. As she opened the door and moved forward, her dog reacted violently. The animal became terrified, trembling and refusing to move, pulling back toward the house with clear panic. The dog's reaction was so intense that it stopped her from approaching any further. A deep sense of fear took hold, and Esther retreated inside. She rushed to find her brother, hoping to bring him to the window so he could see what she was seeing. But when she returned, the light was gone. The craft had vanished completely. There was no departure, no ascent into the sky, no fading glow. It was simply no longer there, as if it had left the same way it arrived. The field outside was once again dark and silent. The following morning, Esther returned to the site in daylight. What she found convinced her that the experience had not been a dream or a momentary illusion. In the grass where the object had rested was a clearly defined rectangular mark measuring approximately 6 meters long and 2 meters wide. The grass within this area was darkened and scorched, as if exposed to intense heat or radiation. The edges of the mark were distinct, matching the shape and size of the object she had seen the night before. This mark did not fade quickly. Investigators later noted that the burned impression remained visible for months after the incident, resisting normal regrowth and weathering. The case was subsequently reported in Canadian UFO Report, an independent quarterly magazine and journal published in Canada during the 1970s, focused on investigating UFO mysteries. The case was also later referenced in the British UFO Research Association journal, placing it among a small number of humanoid encounter cases in Canada that included alleged physical trace evidence. When examining this account critically, several points stand out. The witness was a single observer, and no independent witnesses saw the craft itself. However, Esther Clapperson was described as a long-term resident familiar with the local environment, reducing the likelihood of simple misidentification. The sudden appearance and disappearance of the object, without sound or visible movement, does not easily align with known aircraft or experimental technology of the period. The reported behavior of the dog is consistent with many close encounter cases where animals react with fear before or during sightings. The physical trace is perhaps the most compelling aspect of the case, though it was not subjected to extensive scientific analysis at the time. Without soil samples, photographs, or laboratory testing, the burned area cannot be conclusively linked to a craft of unknown origin. It could, in theory, have resulted from a more mundane cause discovered after the fact, though no such explanation was identified in the original investigations. As with many close encounter reports from the early 1970s, the Rosedale incident sits in a gray area between the extraordinary and the unresolved. It presents a vivid narrative, a sincere witness, and physical traces that suggest something unusual occurred, yet it lacks the level of documentation that would allow for definitive conclusions. Whether it represents an encounter with something truly unknown, a rare psychological or environmental event, or a misinterpreted experience shaped by fear and isolation, the mystery remains unresolved more than 50 years later. And in the quiet Badlands of Alberta, the land still bears the memory of a night when something arrived from nowhere, stayed just long enough to be seen, and left behind questions that have never been fully answered. In the early morning hours of August 27, 1979, a lone patrol car moved through the flat farmland of northwestern Minnesota. The roads were empty, the sky was clear, and Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson was settling into what he expected would be a routine overnight shift. At just after 1:40 a.m., that quiet routine came to an abrupt and unsettling end. As Johnson drove along State Highway 220 near the town of Warren, he noticed a bright white light ahead of him on the road. At first, it appeared distant and stationary, hovering low above the asphalt. Johnson later said the light looked unusual, brighter, and more sharply defined than headlights or aircraft lighting. Assuming it might be a vehicle or possibly an aircraft crossing the highway, he continued driving toward it. As he closed the distance, the light suddenly intensified. In a matter of seconds, it appeared to surge forward directly toward the patrol car. Johnson had no time to brake or swerve. He later described an overwhelming flash that filled the windshield, followed by a loud impact. The next thing he remembered was sitting stunned behind the wheel, his squad car disabled in the middle of the road. When Johnson regained full awareness, he immediately realized something was wrong. The windshield in front of him was shattered in a spiderweb pattern. Both headlights were destroyed. The radio was dead. He felt a burning sensation in his eyes, similar to what welders experience after exposure to intense light. Disoriented but conscious, Johnson stepped out of the vehicle to assess the damage. What he did not find was just as strange as what he did. There were no skid marks on the road, no debris from another vehicle, no sign of an animal strike. The damage to the car was concentrated on the front end and windshield, as if it had collided with something solid yet oddly localized. Johnson also noticed that his wristwatch was no longer keeping the correct time. When later checked against official records, it was determined that both his watch and the squad car clock were approximately 12 to 14 minutes fast. Johnson radioed for assistance using a backup system. Within minutes, other deputies arrived at the scene. They confirmed the damage and quickly ruled out a conventional traffic accident. No nearby aircraft were reported in the area. Weather conditions were calm, with no storms or lightning activity recorded that night. The incident soon drew the attention of investigators beyond the local sheriff's department. Aerospace engineers examined the squad car. Photographs were taken of the broken windshield, bent radio antenna, and damaged light assemblies. The pattern of damage did not match known collisions with birds, deer, or road debris. The windshield fractures suggested exposure to a sudden, intense force rather than a gradual impact. Johnson himself became a central focus of the investigation. He was interviewed repeatedly and told the same story each time. Fellow officers described him as steady, reliable, and not prone to exaggeration. He had no known interest in UFOs prior to the incident and no apparent motive to invent such an experience. Medical examinations confirmed irritation to his eyes consistent with exposure to an intense flash of light. As news of the encounter spread, researchers classified it as a close encounter of the second kind, a UFO report involving physical effects on both a witness and the environment. The combination of a trained law enforcement officer, documented vehicle damage, and a measurable time discrepancy made the case stand out even during the highly active UFO reporting period of the late 1970s. Over the years, several conventional explanations have been proposed. Some skeptics suggested Johnson may have struck a meteorite fragment or experienced an unusual form of ball lightning. Others speculated about secret military testing or rare atmospheric plasma phenomena. Each explanation accounts for certain elements of the incident, but none successfully explains all of them together. Ball lightning, for example, is poorly understood, but is typically associated with storm activity, which was absent that night. Meteors generally travel at extreme speeds and would be unlikely to cause localized damage without leaving debris or burn marks. No military exercises or experimental aircraft were acknowledged in the area at the time. Another unresolved issue is the time discrepancy. Mechanical clocks can malfunction, but the odds of both Johnson's wristwatch and the squad car clock being offset by nearly the same amount immediately following a single event has never been fully explained. Notably, the Val Johnson Incident does not include claims of beings, communication, or extended missing time. The impact of the account comes from its restraint: a light on the road, a sudden encounter, physical damage, documented after effects. Johnson never sought publicity and never attempted to profit from the experience. In UFO history, the case occupies a careful middle ground. It's not proof of extraterrestrial technology, but it's also not easily dismissed as a hoax or simple misidentification. It represents the type of encounter that challenges investigators precisely because it lacks drama while retaining solid evidence. The Val Johnson Incident remains one of the most thoroughly documented law enforcement UFO cases on record. It is frequently cited alongside other high-credibility encounters because it combines trained observation with physical evidence. More than 4 decades later, it still resists a clean, conventional explanation. For researchers and historians, this is why the case continues to be revisited. It sits at the intersection of credible testimony and unresolved physical evidence. In a field crowded with rumor and exaggeration, Val Johnson's experience remains grounded, documented, and stubbornly unexplained. That alone secures its place as one of the most defining UFO encounters of the modern era. On a cold November morning in 1979, a Forestry Commission foreman named Robert Taylor set out to do what he had done hundreds of times before. His job that day was routine. He was inspecting young trees in a managed woodland near the town of Livingston in West Lothian, Scotland. There was nothing unusual about the task, the location, or the timing. It was broad daylight, late morning, and Taylor was on official duty, driving a government-issued van and accompanied only by his dog. Taylor parked the van just north of town and walked roughly 100 yards into Dechmont woods, moving out of sight of the nearby road. The forest was quiet. As he rounded a bend and stepped into a small clearing, he was confronted with something he would later struggle to describe in ordinary language. Hovering just above the ground was a spherical object approximately 20 feet in diameter. Around its midsection ran a short horizontal band, giving the overall appearance of a planet with a narrow ring similar to Saturn. The object was dark gray in color and had a rough, granular surface texture that Taylor compared to emery paper. What struck him immediately was that parts of the object seemed to fade in and out of visibility, as if sections of it were intermittently transparent. He later said it appeared to be trying to camouflage itself. Taylor stood and watched the object in silence for roughly 30 seconds. He noticed details, what looked like antennae arranged around the ring, and small porthole-like shapes set into the surface of the sphere. He felt no initial fear, only amazement and confusion. This was not an aircraft, not a helicopter, and not anything he had encountered in his years working in forestry. Then, the situation changed abruptly. From the underside of the larger object, two smaller spherical objects emerged. Taylor described them as resembling naval mines. They dropped to the ground and began moving toward him, making a distinct mechanical sound as they advanced. He described the noise as a repeated plopping, caused by short protrusions or legs striking the ground as the objects moved. Before Taylor could react or retreat, the two smaller objects reached him. They attached themselves to his trouser legs and began pulling him forward, dragging him toward the hovering sphere. As he was pulled along the ground, Taylor experienced a powerful choking sensation accompanied by a strong, acrid odor. He later compared the smell to burning brake linings. The last clear memory he retained was the sensation of his boots scraping across the forest floor as he was dragged. Moments later, he lost consciousness and collapsed forward onto the ground. When Taylor regained awareness, the clearing was silent. The spherical object and the smaller devices were gone. His dog was nearby, but Taylor found himself unable to speak or stand. He could barely move. Disoriented and weak, he crawled and staggered his way back through the woods toward his van, a distance of approximately 560 yards. When he reached the vehicle, Taylor attempted to use the two-way radio to call for help, but found that he could still not speak. Compounding the situation, the van itself was immobilized. He had earlier backed it onto soft ground and was now stuck fast. With no other option, Taylor began the mile-long walk home on foot. By the time he reached his house at around 11:30 in the morning, his voice had returned. Shaken and exhausted, he told his wife what had happened. She immediately contacted his employer, Malcolm Drummond of the Forestry Commission. Drummond did not dismiss the account. Instead, he accompanied Taylor back to the site in Dechmont Woods the same day. What they found in the clearing would ensure that this incident did not remain a private experience. The ground where the object had hovered was marked by approximately 40 small holes arranged irregularly within a circular area roughly 20 feet in diameter. These holes were shallow but distinct, suggesting pressure rather than digging. In addition to the holes, investigators noted 2 sets of parallel impressions resembling tank treads. Each individual mark was about a foot long, roughly an inch wide, and an inch deep. The parallel lines extended for several feet. Notably, while the grass between these marks was flattened, the underlying soil showed little disturbance. There was no evidence of churned earth, digging, or mechanical scraping consistent with known forestry or agricultural equipment. The physical effects of the encounter were not limited to the ground. Taylor's trousers showed 2 clear tears at the points where he said the smaller objects had attached themselves. A police scientist later examined the damage and concluded that the tears could not have been caused by a single sharp object, such as a nail or branch. According to the assessment, the fabric damage was consistent with a strong upward pulling force applied simultaneously at 2 points. Police were formally notified, making this one of the very few UFO-related incidents in Britain to receive an official law enforcement investigation involving physical trace evidence. Officers found no signs of a hoax, no conventional explanation for the marks on the ground, and no indication of criminal activity. Those who knew Robert Taylor described him as honest, reserved, and reliable. He was 61 years old at the time, in average health for his age, and known to drink very little. He had no known interest in UFOs prior to the incident and gained nothing from reporting the experience. In fact, he appeared uncomfortable with the attention and rarely spoke publicly about it afterward. A rough reconstruction of the timeline suggested that Taylor may have been unconscious in near-freezing conditions for approximately 25 minutes. Despite this, he suffered no lasting physical injury beyond shock and temporary incapacitation. Over the years, skeptics have proposed several explanations. Some have suggested a medical episode or hallucination. However, this fails to account for the physical marks in the clearing and the damage to Taylor's clothing. Others have proposed misidentified military or forestry equipment, though no record supports such activity in the area, and no known machinery matches the described impressions. The possibility of a hoax has also been raised, but it presents significant problems. There was no motive, no financial gain, and no attempt by Taylor to publicize the event. The immediate involvement of his employer and the police further reduces the likelihood of fabrication. Today, the Dechmont Woods incident remains one of the most perplexing close encounter cases in British UFO history. It lacks the familiar elements of many abduction stories. There were no beings observed, no communication, and no medical examinations. Instead, the encounter appears mechanical, impersonal, and abrupt, involving automated objects that interacted physically with a human being and then vanished without explanation. Whether the event represents an unknown technology, a rare natural phenomenon, or something else entirely remains unresolved. What endures is the fact that a routine workday in a quiet Scottish woodland produced physical evidence, official documentation, and a mystery that has resisted conventional explanation for more than 4 decades. On a personal note, this next case is so strange, so unusual, and so bizarre that it's unlike any other story I've encountered here on the channel. All I can say is enjoy the story and let me know what you think it was in the comments. It was a Tuesday afternoon in May 1973 near Lake Common, Sandown on the Isle of Wight. 7-year-old Faye, that's the name we'll use, was out with a boy about her own age when they heard it. A weird, wailing noise, not unlike an ambulance siren. Curious, they followed the sound across the golf links and through a hedge. emerging into a swampy meadow next to the seldom-used Sandown airport, and then the noise stopped. As they crossed a narrow wooden footbridge, something appeared. A blue-gloved hand reached out from under the bridge. A strange figure emerged, fumbling with a book, dropping it in the water, then splashing around to retrieve it. The children watched as it moved toward a metallic hut, the kind used on building sites, except there were no windows. Its motion was strange, a hopping gait, knees raised high, accompanied by the eerie wailing that returned intermittently. When the children had wandered 50 yards away, the figure reappeared, carrying a black knob microphone with a white flex cable attached. The wailing surged, frightening the boy, who ran. Then the figure spoke into the microphone. Though distant, the children could hear the voice clearly. "Hello, are you still there?" it asked. Encouraged, they approached, and the figure, nearly 7 feet tall, with no visible neck, revealed more. Its head seemed wedged directly onto its shoulders. It wore a yellow pointed hat interlocking with a red collar and a green tunic. A black knob topped the hat, with wooden antennae on each side. The face was like anything the children had seen. Triangular markings for eyes, a brown square nose, motionless yellow lips, round markings dotted paper-white cheeks, and a fringe of red hair fell onto the forehead. Wooden slats protruded from the sleeves and below white trousers. Its first words came written in a notebook. "Hello, I am All Colors Sam." The boy hesitated, but Faye read each word as it was pointed to. The words were not in conventional sequence. As they came closer, they discovered the creature could speak without the microphone, though its lips did not move, and the speech was unclear, like someone speaking without opening their mouth properly. It asked the children about themselves, and they asked questions in return. About its clothes, which were ripped. It said this was all it had. Asked if it was a man, the reply was a chuckled no. Asked if it was a ghost, the answer came, "Well, not really, but I am in an odd sort of way." They pressed further. "What are you then?" The only answer was, "You know." Earlier, when Faye and her friend had pressed the clown about who or what it was, it wrote in its notebook, "Hello, and I am All Colors Sam." At first, it seemed like a name, a label that children could understand. But as the conversation continued, the clown made something curious clear. It had no personal name in the way humans do. It said it had no name, but there were others like it, and it drew a rough sketch of one. It confided that it was frightened of people and scared they might hurt it. If attacked, it would not fight back. The children followed its invitation into the hut. Inside were 2 levels. The lower level had plenty of headroom, blue-green wallpaper patterned with dials, a simple electric heater, and wooden furniture. The upper floor was metallic and less spacious. It explained that it fed on berries collected in the late afternoon. The river water could be drunk once clean. Inside, it removed its hat, revealing round white ears and sparse brown hair. Before eating a berry, it performed a curious trick, placing the berry in its ear, then moving it to one of his eyes, and finally to its mouth. The encounter lasted around half an hour. After saying goodbye, the children ran across the golf links to tell the first person they met. He laughed, dismissing the story as a child's fancy, but Faye and the boy were convinced the being was real, either a ghost or someone dressed in an extraordinary way. Faye told her father of the encounter 3 weeks later. At first, he found it unbelievable, but the level of detail and her certainty convinced him otherwise. He spoke to the boy, who confirmed seeing it as well. Attempts to explain it as imagination, a shared hallucination, or a hoax fell short. The creature had only 3 fingers on each blue-gloved hand and 3 toes on its bare, white feet, a detail that would have been hard to fake. When Mr. Y later visited the location, there was no hut, no sign of the being. Nearby, workmen repairing a post appeared oblivious to the figure, as if it were invisible to them. Interestingly, Faye's father, Mr. Y, had his own strange encounters in the years before this. While he never told his daughter, he had observed unusual lights and objects in the skies over the Isle of Wight, bright, hovering spheres, silent and unaccountable, and even strange yellow points below the surface of the sea. In October 1970, while driving from Shanklin to Ryde, he noticed a large, low-flying, multi-lit object hovering over swampy terrain near Brading and Bembridge Downs. He described it as enormous, with a wide ring of 7 or more spherical lights, each bright red like a cherry, interspersed with turquoise and white lights. It made no sound, and at one point appeared to rotate slowly, with the number of lights decreasing to 4. Mr. Y tried signaling with his torch for around 10 minutes while the object weaved back and forth. Later, the lights played hide-and-seek among the trees before vanishing. On several subsequent occasions, he reported seeing single balls of red light in the sky that would hang stationary or follow him along, almost as if tracking his movements. Then, on March 1st, 1972, while perched on the cliffs at Compton Bay, he observed 2 yellow points of light just below the sea surface. He described them as peering up like the eyes of some horrible sea monster, roughly 40 feet away, resembling a periscope. The lights disappeared as the tide receded, and he was able to return home safely. Some of these sightings, Mr. Y later reflected, made his daughter's encounter feel almost like part of a wider, inexplicable reality, a bubble of experience that both he and Faye had glimpsed in different ways. Ghost, spaceman, imagination, or something else entirely, the story of the Sandown clown remains one of the most detailed and unusual encounters recorded from a child witness. What could this strange being have been? Researchers and enthusiasts have put forth several theories, but none are confirmed. Some suggest it may have been a person in an elaborate costume, yet the children's detailed observations, the 3-fingered gloves, 3-toed feet, hopping gait, and the curious berry trick make a deliberate hoax hard to imagine. Others have considered a supernatural explanation. Perhaps it was a ghost or spirit-like entity appearing briefly in our world with no name and a clear fear of humans. And then there's the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Given Mr. Y's earlier sightings of strange lights and hovering objects, it's possible the humanoid was connected to alien activity, a visitor from somewhere beyond Earth. Finally, some modern theorists have wondered if it might have been interdimensional, a being partially manifesting from another reality. The workmen nearby could not see it, and the hut vanished when later visited, details that hint at a localized bubble of reality, only accessible to Faye and her companion. Whatever the explanation, the Sandown clown remains a puzzle, part of a story so vivid and detailed that it continues to fascinate, haunting the border between childhood imagination, the unexplained, and the unknown. If these stories made you stop and think, take a moment to support the channel. Subscribe for more documented encounters, like the video, and share it with anyone who enjoys stories of the unexplained. Most importantly, join the conversation in the comments. I'm especially interested in hearing what people think of the Sandown clown. Your thoughts help shape this community, and they help keep these stories alive. Until next time, keep looking up.